Every year, on the 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month, a profound stillness descends upon cities, towns, and villages across the Commonwealth and beyond. Traffic halts, conversation ceases, and millions of minds turn to quiet, reverent memory. This is the 2-minute silence, the most enduring and universally recognized act of remembrance. We are taught that this powerful tradition began formally in London on the first anniversary of the armistice, November 11th, 1919, decreed by King George V. This is a story most history books tell, and it is largely true as far as the national institution goes. But the real true story of the 2-minute silence, the idea itself, begins much earlier, in places far from the halls of power, driven by the raw, grassroots grief of ordinary people. The moment of stillness that we observe today is not the product of a single royal decree, but the culmination of 3 distinct, powerful acts of community remembrance, one in a small English town, another in a bustling South African port city, and a third driven by a father's personal loss. This is the eye-opening story of the silence that swept the world. To find the true, forgotten seed of this tradition, we must roll the calendar back from the moment of victory to the darkest days of the First World War. The year is 1916. The Battle of Verdun is raging. The Somme is yet to begin, but the heavy losses from earlier engagements like Ypres have already scarred Britain's collective soul. Conscription has just been introduced, shattering the initial patriotic enthusiasm and replacing it with widespread, quiet dread. The setting is Farnham, a quiet, ancient market town in Surrey, England, far from the trenches but close to the war's heavy toll. On May 10th, 1916, local farmers organized a large agricultural fair and market day on Castle Street. The goal was admirable, to raise funds for the British Red Cross. But as the day approached, a question hung heavy in the air. Was it appropriate to host a lively festival, complete with steam fair rides, Morris dancing and auctions, while local sons' husbands and brothers were being slaughtered overseas? The organizers, moved by this crisis of conscience, decided the event needed a gesture of solemn recognition. It needed to be more than just a fundraiser. It needed to be an act of community mourning. The local cooperative secretary, James Alfred Egger, is believed to have been the man who formalized the idea. The official program for the day included a remarkable instruction found decades later in the National Archives. A 2-minute silence will be observed as a token of respect and memory of those who have fallen in the war, to the wounded, to the prisoners, and to those who are fighting for their country. At 11 a.m., the bugles sounded. Historian Maurice Hewins described the scene as shifting from happy chaos to a moment of powerful, unplanned calm. Hundreds of people, farmers, villagers, veterans, Red Cross volunteers, stopped what they were doing. Hats were removed, heads were bowed, and for 120 seconds, only the faint, accidental sounds of cattle lowing and the occasional passing motor car broke the perfect stillness. The local newspaper, the Farnham Herald, called the silence quite impressive. This was almost certainly the world's first ever, publicly orchestrated, 2-minute silence in memory of the war dead. It was a grassroots eruption of public grief, a spontaneous need for ritual at a time when the British government had not yet defined how the nation should mourn its colossal losses. But this profound Farnham moment remained a purely local event. It was a seed, but it was 3 years and thousands of miles away before the tradition would take root and spread. The next pivotal chapter in the silence's story takes us to the Southern Hemisphere, to Cape Town, South Africa. This is the second key origin point, and the one that directly inspired the imperial adoption. By 1918, South African troops had endured some of the war's most horrific battles, including the catastrophic Battle of Delville Wood in 1916, where the South African Brigade suffered an estimated 75% casualty rate. The casualty lists, arriving months later, were devastating to the small, close-knit communities of the Dominion. In May 1918, the city of Cape Town was reeling from a fresh wave of losses. The mayor, Councillor Sir Harry Hands, was personally impacted. His son, Captain Richard Hands, had been mortally wounded in action. Moved by the need for a sustained public expression of sorrow, Sir Harry Hands adopted a local suggestion from Councillor Robert Rutherford Britton to establish a daily moment of silence. Hands decided to institutionalize a powerful, continuous ritual that would acknowledge the daily burden of war. The plan was simple but revolutionary. Every day at noon, the historic noon gun on Signal Hill would fire. This loud, unmistakable boom would signal the start of a 2-minute pause across the entire city. For 1 minute, the citizens would give thanks to those who had survived and returned. For the second minute, they would remember the fallen. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. When the noon gun fired, the entire city came to a halt. Trams, cars, and wagons stopped dead. Pedestrians froze in their tracks. Business ceased. The busy port of Cape Town, normally alive with the sound of commerce, fell into a profound, shared silence. On the balcony of a building at Adderley Street and Darling Street, a bugler would sound the last post to begin the silence, and reveille to end it. This wasn't a one-off event like Farnham's. This was a daily, civic commitment to share mourning that lasted for a full year. It was a tangible, effective way for an entire population to express grief and solidarity. News of this remarkable daily practice, this moving, awe-inspiring silence, spread quickly throughout the British Empire, carried by Reuters reporters and returning soldiers. The Cape Town ritual proved conclusively that a collective, national silence was not just possible, but deeply necessary and effective. The final piece of the puzzle, the mechanism that took the silence global, falls into place in 1919, involving a grieving father and a persistent journalist. The grieving father, Sir Percy Fitzpatrick. Sir Percy Fitzpatrick, a South African politician, author of the beloved book Jock of the Bushveld, and a man deeply respected in imperial circles, was among those profoundly affected by the Cape Town daily silence. Fitzpatrick, too, had lost a son, Major Nugent Fitzpatrick, in France in 1917. Having personally witnessed the dignity and emotional power of Cape Town's ritual, Fitzpatrick realized this daily pause was a perfect model for an annual, empire-wide commemoration on Armistice Day. In October 1919, he wrote a passionate letter to Lord Milner, the colonial secretary. He argued that the ritual was necessary not just for the men who served, but for the women who have lost and suffered and borne so much, and for the children that they know to whom they owe their dear fought freedom. He implored the government to adopt the Cape Town tradition for the entire empire. Unbeknownst to Fitzpatrick, an Australian soldier and journalist named Edward George Honey, who had been medically discharged from the British Army due to shell shock, was having the exact same thought in London. Writing under the pen name Warren Foster in the London Evening News on May 8, 1919, Honey proposed a great silence on the anniversary of the armistice. He was saddened that the initial celebrations had been merely joyous. He believed the day needed a brief but solemn ceremony of respectful collective memory. His initial suggestion was for a 5-minute silence. When Sir Percy Fitzpatrick's official proposal reached King George V through his private secretary, Lord Stamfordham, the king immediately embraced the idea, noting the powerful precedent set by Cape Town. The War Cabinet initially wavered, suggesting a 1-minute pause, but the king insisted on a 2-minute duration, recognizing the need for the second minute dedicated explicitly to those who had paid the supreme sacrifice. After a private trial of the 2-minute pause with the Grenadier Guards at Buckingham Palace, which both Honey and Fitzpatrick may have attended, though their exact interaction remains unclear, the final decision was made. On November 7, 1919, just 4 days before the armistice anniversary, a message from Buckingham Palace was published in every major newspaper across the empire, containing the king's personal request. I desire and hope that at the hour when the armistice came into force, the 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month, there may be for the brief space of 2 minutes a complete suspension of all our normal activities, so that in perfect stillness, the thoughts of everyone may be concentrated on reverent remembrance of the glorious dead. On November 11th, 1919, the world fell silent. The effect was exactly as Fitzpatrick had described it in his letter, and as the citizens of Cape Town had experienced daily. Reports from London described a miraculous halt. The tram cars glided into stillness, motors ceased to cough and fume and stopped dead, and the mighty-limbed dray horses hunched back upon their loads and stopped also, seeming to do of their own volition. From the streets of London to the jungles of India and the farthest corners of the empire, the sound of the world's machinery ceased. The king's private secretary later wrote to Sir Percy Fitzpatrick, assuring him that His Majesty, ever gratefully remembers that the idea of the 2-minute pause on Armistice Day was due to your initiation, a suggestion readily adopted and carried out with heartfelt sympathy throughout the empire. The true story of the 2-minute silence is far more layered and poignant than the simple narrative of a royal decree. The earliest spark, 1916, Farnham the tradition was first conceived and successfully executed at a large public event in a small English market town, 3 years before the national observance. It was a local, necessary act of simultaneous grief. The Proving Ground, 1918. Cape Town the tradition was proved sustainable and powerful by the daily, institutionalized observance in South Africa, moving a grieving father to action. The Mechanism, 1919. London the concept was finally adopted by the British government thanks to the tireless lobbying of Sir Percy Fitzpatrick and the parallel suggestions of Edward Honey, leading to the King's famous proclamation. The enduring power of the 2-minute silence lies in its grassroots origin. It wasn't invented by generals or politicians in an ivory tower. It was born out of collective, overwhelming need of ordinary people, farmers, mayors, writers, and grieving parents, to find a way for the entire world to stop and silently acknowledge the scale of the sacrifice. It is a true story of a simple idea born of tragedy that became one of the most powerful, unifying rituals in human history.